Good morning, everybody. Pastor Nate Bourne here, one of the pastors at Mount Lebanon Lutheran Church, here for a daily devotional thought. We're walking our way through 1 Corinthians, and I don't know how you feel about it, but it's been such a really good walk through the book of Corinthians. Paul has so much to teach us about identity, about purpose, about why we do what we do and what we want to do with our lives, about the most important things. I think Paul has something to say to us in our churches and in our lives about what's really important. We could talk about essential things. And one of those things that Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians, we're in chapter 11. Still in chapter 10. We're not to 11 yet. Whew. But one of the things that Paul says to us after warning us about, to learn from the example of Israel, he teaches us to learn from the example of Israel and warns us to be careful that we don't fall. He has another word for us that's a little bit stronger, actually. And I don't know how you can get much stronger than what he said already in the early parts of chapter 10, but he gets even stronger. He says, "My dear children, flee from idolatry." Flee, which is to say, run, don't hang out. An alcoholic understands this. If you're someone who struggles with alcoholism, if you're someone who struggles with alcohol, you understand this. That if you're trying to stay away from alcohol, you can't have a sip without it turning into a binge. Right? You understand you can't mess around with it. You can't, if you're struggling with drugs, you can't just take a whiff. You can't just take you can't just have a take, right? You can't just do a little bit. You can't stick your toe in the pool and be like, it's going to be okay. You can't mess around with it. Right? You can't mess around with any sort of sin. And that's what's happening in Corinth. The people of Corinth were going to church. I'll say it this way. The people in Corinth it sounds like they were going to church on Sunday, and then they were going to hang out at the temple, the pagan temple, the unbelieving temple on Tuesday, right? They're doing their church thing, and they're doing this other thing. And what Paul says to them is, no. You can't do that. You can't follow Jesus and then stick your toe in the water over here. He says you can't participate in the table of God, and notice how strong he is. You can't participate in the table of demons. You got to read this because Paul doesn't mince words, right? You can't do both. You can't stick your toe in the water. And that's such an important word for us as we begin a day, that we cannot stick our toe in the water of sin. We can't stick our toe in and see if it feels good, because the thing about sin is the devil makes it seem so good. Remember that fruit that he put in front of Eve? God actually said that fruit was bad, but the devil made that fruit look good. Eve looked at the fruit and she said, "It's pleasing to the eye. It's good for food," and she said, "I'm going to eat it," even though God had said it was bad. But the devil made her think it was good, and that's what the devil does to sin. He makes us think that sin is good. Right? He calls what God says is bad, he calls it good, and what God says is good, he calls bad, right? This is what the devil does. He tempts us. And so you can't even stick your toe in the water, because as soon as you stick your toe in the water, you're about to fall in. Right? You can't do both. You can't mess around with sin, and that's why Paul says run. Flee from idolatry. Run as fast as you can. Run as far away as you can. Do not mess around with sin. Do not mess around with whatever God says is false and sinful and evil. Do not mess with it. Do not stick your toe in the water. Do not linger near it. Run as far, as fast, and as quickly away as you can. Because, dear people, dear child of God, you have been, as Paul says, you are participants with Christ. By faith, you are participants in his life. You are participants in his death. You are participants in his resurrection. You are participants with him in the eternity that he has stored up for you in heaven. So you are participants with him in your whole life. So don't mess around with sin, because you are Christ's. and Christ is yours. So go live for him today. Stay far away from sin and stay as close to Jesus in your life as you can. And as we said last night, when you stumble, when you fall, call on him for mercy. Return to the Lord with your hearts, because the Lord is compassionate and gracious. He is slow to anger. He's overflowing with love. He relents. He forgives. He refreshes. He restores. So run away from sin and run to the Savior who always frees you from your sin. Have a great day, everybody. The Lord be with you all and grant you his peace.